Mara Ellis dropped an entire stack of books on her first week at the bookstore. The stranger who helped her pick them up had dark eyes and careful hands, and he kept coming back every week asking for recommendations. She thought he just loved reading. She had no idea he was coming back for her. Tell me where you're watching from, because today you'll discover that sometimes the best love stories are written between the pages of someone else's dream. The bookstore in West Village smelled like old paper and fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the back. Page and Cup occupied a corner building that had probably been something else entirely 100 years ago, with original wooden floors that creaked in friendly ways and exposed brick walls lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Large windows let in afternoon light that made the dust motes dance. It was the kind of place that felt like a sanctuary, which was exactly why Marco Ronaldo had been coming here for 10 years. He'd had the kind of day that made him question every decision he'd ever made. The authentication lab had nearly cleared a Caravaggio that turned out to be a sophisticated modern fake. The client was threatening legal action. His underboss Nico was handling a shipment issue that required Marco's attention, but he couldn't focus on anything. And the territorial tensions with the Castellano family were escalating in ways that would require decisions he didn't want to make. So he came here, to Mrs. Abbott's bookstore, the place his father had loved before everything went wrong, the only space in Manhattan where Marco could breathe without feeling the weight of family expectations crushing him. Mara Ellis had been working at Page & Cup for exactly 4 days, and she was already pretty sure she'd made the best decision of her life, even if her parents in New Jersey thought she'd lost her mind. She'd quit her marketing job 2 weeks ago, after waking up one morning and realizing she'd spent 3 years of her life making PowerPoint presentations about products she didn't believe in for a company that didn't value her. The bookstore paid half what she'd been making. Her apartment was going to be tight financially. Her father had given her a lecture about fiscal responsibility that lasted 40 minutes. Her mother kept sending her job listings from Indeed, but she was happy. For the first time in years, she was genuinely, completely happy. She balanced another stack of new arrivals against her hip, trying to calculate if she could make it to the fiction section without dropping anything. The books were heavier than they looked. The stack was definitely too tall. She should make 2 trips. She didn't make 2 trips. The answer to whether she could make it to the fiction section, as it turned out, was absolutely not. The books went everywhere, hardcovers hitting the floor with heavy thud sounds that made every single customer in the previously quiet store turn and stare. A trade paperback skidded under a display table. Another one landed splayed open, pages bent. Mara's face went nuclear hot with embarrassment. "Oh God," she muttered, dropping to her knees. "I'm so sorry. I swear I'm not usually this much of a disaster." She was talking to no one in particular, just mortified and trying to gather books as quickly as possible before Mrs. Abbott came out from the back and reconsidered her hiring decision. "Let me help." The voice came from above her, deep, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. Mara looked up. The man crouching beside her was unfairly attractive. Late 30s maybe, dark hair styled in that effortless way that probably required effort, wearing a suit that looked expensive even to her untrained eye. But it was his eyes that caught her. Dark brown, almost black, with an intensity that made her forget for a second that she was kneeling on a bookstore floor surrounded by scattered novels. "You don't have to," she started, but he was already picking up books, stacking them neatly. They both reached for the same book. Their hands touched. Everything stopped. It was one of those moments that felt significant, even though nothing was actually happening. Just 2 strangers, hands brushing over a paperback copy of something by Ian McEwan. But the air shifted, changed, became charged with possibility. Mara pulled her hand back first. "Sorry, I'm Mara, in case you want to file a complaint with management about the hazardous employee." "Marco." He handed her the book, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "And I don't think books qualify as hazardous materials. Inconvenient, maybe." "That's generous." She stood, arms full of rescued books. He stood too, and suddenly the aisle felt much narrower than it had a minute ago. "Are you okay? None of them hit you, did they?" "I'm fine. Completely uninjured by rogue literature." She laughed despite her embarrassment. "Well, that's a relief. I'm still in my first week, trying not to create too many workplace incidents." "First week? What did you do before?" "Marketing. Corporate tech marketing, specifically. 3 years of making PowerPoint presentations about products I didn't understand for clients who didn't care." The words came out more honest than she'd intended. "Sorry, that probably sounded bitter." "It sounded honest. There's a difference." She looked at him more carefully. Most people would have made some polite comment and moved on, but he was still standing there, still looking at her like she'd said something worth hearing. "I left because I was miserable," she continued, not entirely sure why she was telling a complete stranger this. "Good at the job, made decent money, hated every second. So I quit and took a job at a bookstore that pays half as much. My family thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you?" "Probably. But I'm happy for the first time in years, so maybe losing your mind is underrated." Marco's smile widened. "I like that philosophy. What about you? What do you do when you're not rescuing bookstore employees from their own clumsiness?" "I run an art authentication lab. We verify paintings and sculptures for collectors, museums, auction houses. Make sure what they're buying is actually what they think they're buying." "That sounds incredible. Like detective work, but for art." "Sometimes it feels that way. Other times it's just science and arguing with people who don't want to hear that their Rembrandt is actually a very good fake." "Do you get that a lot? People not wanting to accept the truth?" "More than you'd think. People believe what they want to believe. Facts can be very inconvenient." They were still standing in the middle of the aisle, books in her arms, customers trying to navigate around them. Mara became aware that she'd been talking to this stranger for several minutes and hadn't once thought about getting back to work. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, shifting into professional mode. "Officially, as your non-hazardous bookstore employee." "I was looking for something new. Fiction. Something that's not about work or responsibility or making difficult decisions. Escapism. I can work with that." She thought for a moment, then moved down the aisle. He followed naturally. "Have you read any Elena Ferranti? The Neapolitan novels, a few years ago." "What about her other work?" Mara pulled a book from the shelf, handed it to him. "This one. It's different from the Naples Quartet, but it still has that emotional intensity. It's about identity and memory and what we inherit from our parents, whether we want to or not." Marco read the back cover, then looked at her with something like appreciation. "You've read it. Twice. It's devastating in the best way. The kind of book that makes you feel things you've been trying not to feel." She paused. "If that's what you're looking for. It might be exactly what I'm looking for." The way he said it made her think he wasn't just talking about the book. They walked to the register together. Mrs. Abbott was behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing her usual cardigan despite the warm afternoon. She looked at Marco, then at Mara, then back at Marco with a knowing expression that made Mara want to disappear. "Marco," Mrs. Abbott said warmly. "Good to see you. The usual?" "Please, and this." He set the book on the counter. "Mara's recommendation?" "She has excellent taste." Mrs. Abbott rang up the book while Mara tried not to stare at the easy familiarity between them. Marco was clearly irregular. She'd been here 4 days and hadn't noticed him, which seemed impossible now. "Your espresso and strudel will be ready in a moment," Mrs. Abbott said, then looked at Mara. "Marco's been coming here for years. Since I opened. He appreciates good books and good coffee." "And excellent strudel," Marco added. "Don't undersell your baking, Mrs. Abbott." The older woman smiled, pleased. "It's my mother's recipe. Austrian, real strudel, not the American version." She disappeared into the back where the small cafe was tucked, leaving Mara and Marco alone at the counter. "Come back and tell me what you think," Mara said, surprising herself with her boldness. "When you finish the book. I like hearing other people's thoughts on books I love." "I will." He said it like a promise. Mrs. Abbott returned with a small plate of apple strudel and a double espresso. Marco paid for everything, took his coffee and pastry to one of the armchairs near the window, and pulled out his phone. Mara went back to shelving, very aware of exactly where he was sitting, trying not to look over every 30 seconds. When she finally allowed herself one glance, he was reading the back cover of the Ferrante novel, and she felt something warm settle in her chest. 10 days later, Marco came back. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of lazy autumn day when the bookstore was full of people browsing slowly, in no hurry to be anywhere else. Mara was restocking the new arrivals table when she heard Mrs. Abbott greet someone warmly. She looked up. Marco was at the counter, already ordering his usual espresso. He was dressed more casually today, dark jeans and a gray sweater, no suit jacket. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed. Their eyes met across the store. He smiled. She smiled back, suddenly nervous in a way that felt both terrible and wonderful. He walked over once he had his coffee, and Mara tried to act like she hadn't been thinking about him for the past 10 days, which she absolutely had been. Just a little. Maybe more than a little. "You came back," she said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near breathless. "I finished the book. You were right about everything." "I love being right. It's one of my favorite things." "Should I be concerned about your ego?" "Probably. But let's focus on the book instead. What did you think?" He set his coffee down on the table between them. The part about the father. How the daughter spent her entire life trying to understand him, not to forgive him or excuse him, just to understand who he really was. That stayed with me. Something in his voice made Mara look at him more carefully. "Your dad?" "He died when I was 23. I'm still trying to figure out who he was. Who he was before things changed. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He picked up his coffee, took a sip. "But some things you carry with you." They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable kind of silence that usually took much longer than 10 days to develop. "My break is in 5 minutes," Mara heard herself say. "Do you want to sit in the cafe and talk properly? I have opinions about that book that require more than standing in the middle of a bookstore." "I'd like that." 5 minutes later, they were settled at a small table in the back cafe area. The space was cozy, maybe 10 tables total, with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Mara had a latte with a leaf pattern in the foam. Marco had ordered a second espresso and a slice of strudel that he insisted they share, pushing the plate to the center of the table with 2 forks. "Mrs. Abbott's strudel is legendary," he explained. "You can't work here and not try it. It's basically a job requirement." "I've been trying to pace myself. I walked past the cafe section 3 times yesterday just smelling it. I'm pretty sure I could eat my entire body weight in this and not regret a single bite." That's the only correct response. She took a bite. Her eyes closed briefly. "Oh my God, this is dangerous. I'm going to gain 20 pounds working here. Worth it." They talked about the Ferrante book for 20 minutes. About mothers and daughters and the weight of family history, about memory and how it shapes identity, about the ways we try to understand the people who made us, even when understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. The conversation flowed easily, like they were picking up a discussion they'd started years ago instead of just meeting for the second time. "The daughter in the book," Mara said, "spent her whole life trying to piece together who her mother really was. Not just the version she showed her family, but the complicated woman underneath. That feeling of trying to know your parents as actual people, not just as your parents, that resonated." "With your family?" "A little. My parents are very straightforward people. What you see is what you get. But my grandmother, my mom's mother. She had this whole other life before she got married. She was a dancer in New York in the 50s, performed in clubs, knew artists and writers, lived in the village. Then she married my grandfather and moved to the suburbs and became a school teacher and raised 4 kids. Mara traced the rim of her cup. I found photos once when I was a teenager. Her in these gorgeous dresses on stage looking so alive. When I asked my mom about it, she said Grandma didn't like to talk about that time, that she'd made her choice and was happy with it. But you wonder. I wonder if she was happy or if she just convinced herself she was, if she missed that other life, if she ever regretted choosing stability over passion. She looked up at him. Sorry, that's probably too personal for a first coffee. It's not. And I understand that feeling of wondering about the roads not taken. Your father? The bookstore? Marco was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. My father worked in a bookstore in Brooklyn when I was young. Small, independent place, nothing fancy. But he loved it. Loved books. Loved talking to customers about what to read next. He'd bring me sometimes after school. Let me sit in the corner and read while he worked. Those are some of my best memories. What happened? Life happened. Money got tight. He got involved with the wrong people trying to solve the wrong problems. By the time I was a teenager, books were something from our past. A different life. He took a sip of espresso. He died when I was 23. Never got back to that version of himself. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly hard. It was. Still is some days. I come here partly because it reminds me of him, of who he was before everything else. Mrs. Abbott knew him. She did. They were friends when he worked in Brooklyn. When she opened this place, he helped her sometimes on weekends, for free, just because he loved being around books again. Marco smiled slightly at the memory. She lets me come here because of that, because she remembers the good version of him. Mara reached across the table without thinking, touched his hand briefly. He'd be proud of you. Building something legitimate, the authentication lab. That's creating something beautiful from something difficult. I'd like to think so. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the cafe sounds around them fading into background noise. So, your family in New Jersey, Marco said eventually, shifting to lighter territory. They really didn't understand about the job change? Mara laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. That's the understatement of the year. My dad sat me down and showed me a spreadsheet. An actual spreadsheet with projected earnings and retirement calculations comparing my marketing career trajectory to working retail. He had charts, Marco. Multiple charts. That's very thorough. He's an accountant. Everything is thorough. My mom took a different approach. She cried and asked if she'd failed as a parent. If she hadn't taught me the value of hard work and financial security. Mara shook her head. They're not bad people. They're just very practical. Very focused on stability. The idea of giving up a good salary and benefits to work in a bookstore doesn't compute for them. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway because I was dying inside. Every morning I'd wake up dreading the day. Every Sunday night I'd feel physically sick thinking about Monday. That's no way to live, you know. Even if the paycheck is good. She paused. My little sister Lily gets it. She's at NYU studying painting. My parents hate that too. She and I text each other supportive messages about being the disappointing children. You're not disappointing. You're brave. You don't know that. Maybe I'm just a coward running away from responsibility. Is that what you think? Sometimes. My ex definitely thought so. Said I was being immature. That adults don't just quit good jobs because they're not passionate enough. That I needed to grow up and accept that work isn't supposed to make you happy. Your ex sounds like someone who confused existing with living. Mara looked at him with something like wonder. Yes, exactly that. He had this whole speech about how happiness is overrated and stability is what matters. About how I was chasing some fantasy instead of appreciating what I had. How long were you together? 2 years. Broke up 4 months ago. He still texts sometimes saying I'll realize he was right and come back. She stirred her latte absently. The worst part is sometimes I wonder if he was right. If I made a huge mistake. If I'm just, you didn't, Marco said firmly. Make a mistake, I mean. You chose something that makes you happy. That takes courage, not cowardice. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Her eyes got a little wet. Thank you. I needed to hear that. It's just the truth. Her manager called from the front. Breakover. I should get back, Mara said reluctantly. But come back. Let me give you another recommendation. I will. Again, that tone that made it sound like more than just a promise about books. He came back the following Thursday evening, looking stressed in a way he hadn't before. His suit jacket was still on, tie still knotted properly, briefcase in hand like he'd walked straight from the office without stopping anywhere first. There were tension lines around his eyes that hadn't been there on Sunday. Mara was at the register processing a return when he walked in. She saw the stress immediately, the way his shoulders were tight, the slight clench of his jaw. When he approached the counter, she made a decision. Bad day? He looked surprised that she'd noticed. How did you know? You're wearing your full armor. Last time you were here, you were casual, relaxed. This is your work uniform, which means you came straight from something difficult and needed escape immediately. She came around the counter. Follow me. I have exactly what you need. She led him to the humor section without hesitation, scanned the shelves, pulled out a specific book. Christopher Moore. Have you read him? No. Perfect. This one is absurd and hilarious and deeply beautifully weird. By page 50, you'll either think I'm a genius or question my sanity. Possibly both. But you'll laugh. I absolutely guarantee it. That's a confident guarantee. I have yet to be wrong about a book recommendation. My track record is literally flawless. What about your track record for humility? Also flawless, obviously. He actually laughed, and some of the tension around his eyes eased. Thank you. For what? For noticing. For caring enough to try to help. Most people don't pay that much attention. Most people aren't booksellers with excellent observational skills and a pathological need to fix things with literature. She handed him the book. This is my superpower. Weaponized book recommendations for people having terrible days. Best superpower I've encountered in a long time. They went to the cafe. He got his usual espresso. She had already had 3 coffees, but got another latte anyway, because sitting with him felt more important than caffeine limits. Do you want to talk about what made it a bad day? She asked. Or would you rather I distract you with book talk? Distraction sounds better. So she told him about the customer who'd come in that morning insisting they must carry a specific book because she'd seen it in her dream. Mara had spent 20 minutes trying to figure out what book it might have been based on dream descriptions involving blue but also green, and someone was sad but also happy. Marco listened, smiling, some of the stress continuing to drain from his face. Did you ever figure out what book it was? No clue. I recommended 3 different things and she bought all of them, so I'm calling it a win. Sales technique through confusion. Innovative. I prefer to think of it as solution-oriented customer service. They talked until her break ended, and when she went back to work, he stayed and read in one of the armchairs, and something about having him in her space made the rest of her shift better. The Saturday after that, he came back looking completely different. Weekend casual, jeans and a gray sweater, no stress visible anywhere. He walked in smiling, waved at Mrs. Abbott, and came straight to where Mara was restocking literary fiction. Good morning, he said, and there was something lighter about his whole energy. Good morning yourself. Better week? Much better. Took your advice. Read the Christopher Moore book in 2 days. You were right about everything. I'm always right about books. It's a gift. It really is. He picked up a book she'd just shelved, read the back. Are you working all day? Until 4. Can I take you to early dinner when you're done? There's a place in the East Village I think you'd like. Small, family-owned, amazing pasta. Her heart did something acrobatic. Like a date? Like a very intentional date where I'm trying to impress you with my knowledge of good restaurants. Will it work? The impressing me part? I'm hoping. Then yes, I'd love to. They had coffee in the cafe while her shift continued, easy conversation between customers, and Mara felt something shift between them. The awareness that this was becoming something real, something with potential. The Tuesday after that date, which had been wonderful in every way, Marco showed up carrying a book. I brought you something, he said, slightly uncertain in a way that was endearing on someone who usually seemed so self-assured. He handed her an Italian novel in translation. The cover was beautiful, abstract art in blues and grays. I thought of you when I read this, he explained. It reminded me of Ferrante, but darker. More about fathers and sons than mothers and daughters, but the same emotional intensity. The same way of making you feel everything. Mara took the book like it was something precious. Because it was. He'd thought of her while reading. Had bought her a book because it made him think of her. Thank you, she said, and her voice came out softer than intended. This is really thoughtful. I hope you like it. If you hate it, I'll have to question all my literary judgment. I'm sure I'll love it. And even if I didn't, which I will, the fact that you thought of me while reading is... She paused, looking for the right word. It's really special. He smiled, pleased, and maybe slightly relieved. Good, that's good. They exchanged numbers that day. For book recommendations, Mara said, trying to sound casual. Of course, Marco agreed. Purely professional book discussion purposes. They both knew it was more than that. The text started that evening. Long conversations that began about books and wandered into everything else. Life, dreams, fears, observations about the city, terrible puns that made sense to no one but them. By week 5, Marco wasn't even pretending he was coming for books anymore. He'd show up, get his coffee, and sit with her during her break just to talk. They'd discuss articles they'd read, movies they wanted to see, places they'd traveled or wanted to travel to. I've never been to Europe, Mara admitted one afternoon. I know that's embarrassingly American, but we did family vacations to Florida and the occasional road trip. My parents aren't travelers. Where would you go, if you could go anywhere? Ireland. Trinity College Library in Dublin. I've seen photos online and it looks like heaven. That long room with all those old books, centuries of stories preserved. I'd probably cry the first time I walked in. That's very specific. I've been dreaming about it since I was 16 and saw it in a movie. It became this symbol in my head of everything I loved about books and history and the way stories connect us across time. She laughed at herself. Sorry. That's very dramatic for a library. It's not dramatic. It's passionate. There's a difference. She looked at him, and the way he was looking back made her breath catch. Marco, I should let you work. He stood, but he didn't move away immediately. But maybe we could do something this weekend. Not dinner. Something different. A walk? Museum? Both. I'd like both. Saturday? Saturday. By week 6, they were seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week outside the bookstore. Dinners, walks, museums, Sunday brunch that turned into all-day conversations. They texted constantly. She learned he spoke fluent Italian, restored furniture as a hobby, had 2 younger sisters he was fiercely protective of, and made carbonara that was better than anything she'd ever had at a restaurant. He learned she played violin badly, but enthusiastically, made terrible puns she found hilarious, secretly loved science fiction, even though she claimed to only read serious literature, and had a laugh that made every difficult part of his life seem manageable. They were falling in love. Neither had said it yet. Both knew it was happening. Both were terrified and thrilled in equal measure. 6 weeks after they met, Mara was working the register on a Tuesday evening when the door opened and her past walked in. Ryan looked exactly the same. Expensive casual wear, perfectly styled hair, that expression of mild annoyance he wore like a default setting. She hadn't seen him in 4 months. Hadn't missed him at all. Mara. Her whole body tensed. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" "You didn't return my calls. I texted. Multiple times. Because we're broken up. I don't have to respond to my ex. This is getting ridiculous." He walked closer to the counter, and she resisted the urge to step back. "You've made your point. Had your little adventure. Time to come back to reality." "I am in reality. This is my life. My choice." "Working retail for minimum wage? That's not a choice, Mara. That's a mistake you're too stubborn to admit." He pulled out his phone. "I got you an interview at my firm. Marketing director position. Starts at $90,000. You can thank me later." "I don't want to work at your firm." "You're making $12 an hour selling books to hipsters. This isn't sustainable. What's your plan here? Live in that tiny apartment and pretend you're in some romantic movie about following your dreams?" "I'm happy. That's the plan. To be happy." "You're being childish. We were good together. This is you running away like you always do when things get real." "We weren't good together, Ryan. You made decisions for me. Told me what to wear, who to see, what to want. That's not a relationship. I was helping you. You needed direction, structure. Left alone, you make impulsive choices." He gestured around the bookstore like it was evidence of her poor judgment. "Like this. I think the lady asked you to leave." The voice came from behind Ryan. Deep, controlled, but with an edge that made it very clear this wasn't a suggestion. Mara looked past her ex. Marco stood there, still in his work clothes, clearly having just arrived. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. Ryan turned. "Who the hell are you?" Someone who recognizes when a woman is done with a conversation. "This is none of your business." "Actually, it is. She's uncomfortable. That makes it my business." They were staring at each other now, some kind of male standoff that would have been funny if Mara wasn't still processing the fear and anger Ryan's presence had triggered. "Ryan, leave," she said firmly. "We're done. Completely done. I've moved on. You should too." Ryan looked at Marco, back at Mara, then laughed without humor. "This is who you're choosing, bookstore customer guy? Good luck with that, Mara. You're going to need it." He left. The door slammed behind him. Mara exhaled hard, gripping the counter. I'm sorry you had to see that." Marco walked around the counter, stood close but didn't touch, giving her space. "Don't apologize for him being an ass. He wasn't always like that." The words came tumbling out. "In the beginning he was different, attentive, interested in what I thought. Then it shifted. He started deciding things. What we'd eat, where we'd go, who I should be friends with. Small things at first, then bigger things. And I let him because I thought that's what relationships were. Someone taking charge. That's not a relationship. That's control. I know that now. But sometimes I wonder if I'm being too difficult, too demanding. If maybe I should just... Mara." He waited until she looked at him. "You're not difficult. You're not wrong for wanting to be treated like an equal, like someone whose opinions and choices matter. That's the bare minimum. My therapist says the same thing. Then your therapist and I agree. You deserve someone who sees you as a partner, not a project to manage. She took a shaky breath. Thank you for intervening and for not making me feel stupid about it. You could never be stupid. He paused. I need to tell you something. Because you deserve honesty. Because I won't do what he did and hide who I really am from you. Something in his tone made her nervous. Okay. Can you take a break? This conversation needs privacy. 15 minutes later, they were sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park, close but not touching. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold light. People walked past, oblivious. You told me about Ryan, Marco started. About control, about someone not respecting your choices. I need you to know who I am before you decide if you want to keep seeing me. I know who you are. You know I run an art authentication lab. That's real, legitimate. I'm genuinely proud of that work. He took a breath. But my family has other business interests. An organization that's been operating in New York for 2 generations. My father got pulled into it through bad debts and worse decisions. When he died, I inherited not just the lab, but everything else. Mara felt her stomach tighten. This organization you're talking about, that's what people mean when they say connected. Yes, I manage territory in Lower Manhattan. We provide protection for businesses, handle certain financial operations, some import and export that doesn't follow every regulation. The lab is real, but it's also useful for moving money and authenticating pieces that come from questionable sources. The world felt tilted, like reality had shifted slightly to the left. Why are you telling me this? Because I won't hide who I am, won't control what information you have. You get to make an informed choice about whether this is something you can accept, whether I'm someone you want in your life. He looked at her directly. You deserve the truth. Then you decide. She stood up, walked a few steps away. Her mind was racing. Mafia. He was telling her he was in the Mafia. That seemed impossible. He was kind and funny, and brought her books, and made her feel seen in ways no one else ever had. He was also apparently a criminal. Are you dangerous? The question came out smaller than she intended. To you? Never. To people who threaten what's mine? Yes. But I have rules. No drugs, no civilian casualties. Honor matters. I'm a criminal by law, but I'm not a monster. She turned to look at him. He was still sitting on the bench, hands loose between his knees, waiting. Not pushing. Not demanding. Just honest. I need to go home, she said finally. Process this. Can we meet tomorrow? There's a cafe 2 blocks from here. 9 a.m. Of course, whatever you need. Thank you for telling me the truth. You deserved that much. She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. She didn't look back. That night, Mara didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ryan and Marco, and the difference between control and honesty. Ryan had hidden things to manipulate her, made decisions without her input because he thought he knew better. Marco had told her something that could make her run, but he'd told her anyway because she deserved to choose. At 8:45 the next morning, Mara walked into the cafe 2 blocks from the park. Marco was already there, sitting at a corner table, 2 coffees in front of him. He looked like he'd slept about as well as she had. She sat down, took the coffee he pushed toward her. Regular with cream, the way she liked it. He'd remembered. I thought about what you told me, she started. About your family, what you do. And I thought about Ryan, how he controlled every part of my life and called it caring, made me smaller so he could feel bigger. Marco waited, not interrupting. You told me the truth knowing I might walk away. That's the opposite of control. That's respect. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I'm scared. This is complicated and probably dangerous, and every logical part of my brain says I should run. But my gut says you're different. You're honest. You gave me a choice. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to try. If you still want to. If the offer still stands. Relief washed over his face. Always. The offer always stands. I need boundaries, though. I don't want to know operational details. I don't need to be involved in that part of your world. I just need to know you're safe, that you're careful, that you'll come home. I promise. You're kept separate from that world. You're protected. Always. And if I change my mind, if it becomes too much, then I respect that. No questions, no guilt, no making you feel bad for choosing yourself. Your choice matters more than what I want. She reached across the table, took his hand. Okay then, let's do this. Really, do this. Yeah? Yeah, take me to dinner. A real date. Tonight. Tonight, he agreed. Over the next 3 months, Mara learned what it meant to love someone complicated. She met Marco's sisters, Sophia and Isabella, who grilled her extensively before deciding she was good for their brother. She had dinner with his mother, Gianna, who cooked enough food for 20 people and asked pointed questions about marriage timelines. She watched Marco navigate 2 worlds, the legitimate art authentication business he was passionate about, and the family organization he'd inherited. She saw how respected he was in both, how people looked to him for decisions, how much responsibility he carried. Marco met her family too. Dinner in New Jersey, her parents skeptical, her sister Lily immediately adoring him. By the end of the evening, her father had thawed slightly. He makes you happy, he said to Mara while they were alone in the kitchen. I still think you should have a backup plan, but he makes you happy. That counts for something. They fell into routines. Sunday dinners with his mother, Thursday evenings at the bookstore, weekend mornings at the farmer's market. Normal couple things, except nothing about them was entirely normal. 4 months into their relationship, Ryan made one more attempt to contact Mara. He showed up at the bookstore, started making threats about exposing her boyfriend's real business. He stopped coming around after that. Mara never knew exactly what happened, but she suspected Marco had made it very clear that continuing to harass her would be a poor life choice. She didn't ask for details, trusted that whatever had been done appropriately. I don't need you to fight my battles, she told Marco that evening, but thank you for having my back. Always, he said. But you're right. Next time, I let you handle it unless you ask for help. In month 5, they were having dinner at his apartment when the conversation turned to dreams and travel. If you could go anywhere in the world, Marco asked, where would you go? Mara didn't have to think about it. Trinity College Library in Dublin. I've seen photos, but I want to stand in it. The long room with all those books that are centuries old. That's my dream. Marco filed this information away, already planning. 2 weeks later, he mentioned casually over coffee. I have to go to Dublin next week. Business trip. 3 days. Come with me. Marco, I can't just take off work. I already talked to Mrs. Abbott. She approved it. You asked my boss before asking me? I knew you'd say no for practical reasons, so I eliminated the practical reasons. He smiled. Say yes, Mara. This is very presumptuous. I prefer the term confident. Say yes. She wanted to be annoyed at his high-handedness, but she was too busy being charmed. Yes, fine, yes. They flew out on a Friday morning, arrived in Dublin by evening. Marco had booked a hotel overlooking the River Liffey, beautiful and expensive, in a way that made Mara slightly uncomfortable, until he reminded her that between the lab and his other business interests, he could afford it. Saturday, they explored the city. Temple Bar, Dublin Castle, St. Stephen's Green. She was happy and excited, completely unaware that Marco was increasingly nervous about what he had planned. Sunday morning, he said, "I want to show you something." He led her through Trinity College's historic campus, and she assumed they were just sightseeing. Then they approached the old library building. "Marco, is this your dream? I know." They entered the long room, and Mara stopped breathing. 200 feet of books stretched before her. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on both levels, marble busts of philosophers and writers watching over everything. The smell of old paper and leather and history. Shafts of light streamed through tall windows. It was more beautiful than any photograph could capture. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's perfect." "It is." But Marco was looking at her, not the books. They walked slowly through the space. Mara touched spines gently, reverently, read titles in Latin and ancient languages, cried a little because sometimes beauty is overwhelming. After 30 minutes, they reached the far end of the long room. Fewer tourists here. Quieter. "Mara." She turned. Marco was kneeling. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Marco, 5 months ago, you dropped books on your first day of work. I helped you pick them up and everything changed. You saw who I was, all the complicated parts, and you chose me anyway. You gave me peace, made me laugh, reminded me that some things are worth being vulnerable for." He pulled out a ring. Simple band with a sapphire, her favorite color, something he'd remembered from a conversation months ago about birthstones. "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life bringing you to libraries around the world, building something real with you, making you happy every single day." His voice cracked slightly. "Marry me. Please." She was crying for real now. "You brought me to Dublin, to Trinity College. You remembered this was my dream. I remember everything you tell me." "Yes," laughing through tears. "Yes, obviously yes. I love you so much." He stood, slid the ring onto her finger, kissed her. Soft and sweet and full of everything they were building together. A nearby tourist started clapping. Others joined. Small crowd of strangers celebrating two people they'd never met. Mara laughed against Marco's lips. "We have an audience." "I don't care even a little bit. I'm engaged in a library." "In your dream library. That was intentional." "You're ridiculous. You're marrying me anyway." "I really am." They stayed in the long room for another hour, looking at books, holding hands, talking about their future surrounded by centuries of history and stories. 1 year later, on a Saturday morning, Marco walked into Page and Cup and heard the familiar sound of books falling. He grinned. Some things never changed. Mara was in the fiction section, on the floor, gathering books and laughing at herself. Still terrible at carrying too many things at once. Still the person he loved most in the world. "Need help?" he asked. She looked up, face lighting up. Some things never change, do they? Why fix what works? Falling books brought me to you. He knelt, helped her gather books. Their hands touched. Still that spark. Always that spark. "I love you, Mrs. Ronaldo." "Love you too, even though you're impossible." Impossibly charming. That's one interpretation. They stood, books restacked, narrow aisle suddenly feeling intimate the way it always did when they were close. Mrs. Abbott appeared at the end of the aisle. "Your strudel is ready, you two. Stop making moon eyes at each other and come eat." Mara laughed. She has no subtlety. Never has. They walked to the cafe section, ordered their usual coffees, sat at their usual table. Talked about her grad school classes in literature, his lab expansion plans, the trip to Italy next month to see his family. Normal married couple things. Except they weren't entirely normal. He ran a Mafia family. She knew and accepted and loved him anyway. The best love stories don't always start in expected places. Sometimes they start with falling books and hands touching. With honesty that could drive someone away, but brings them closer instead. With choosing each other not despite the complications, but because of the courage it takes to love someone fully. Mara had walked into a bookstore looking for peace after leaving a life that was slowly killing her. She'd found that, but she'd also found someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. Someone who brought her to libraries in foreign countries and promised her a lifetime of adventures between the pages and beyond them. Marco had walked into the same bookstore looking for escape from the weight of responsibilities he'd never asked for. He'd found that too. But more importantly, he'd found someone who looked at all the complicated parts of him and didn't run. Someone who made him laugh and gave him peace and reminded him that some risks are worth taking. They'd both found exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. Subscribe for more Mafia romance stories. Join our members area for exclusive content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.